Marry me. This is Lady Nephtes of Universal Pagan Temple here with Blacksun, and he's going to be telling us about a few of his books. Now, Blacksun, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you. Marry me yourself. I suppose I should give a little brief history of who and what I am. I am a pagan priest, and I have been working with my wife and priestess. Her magical name is Shadowhawk, and we've been at it for 35 years now. It's a long time to run a coven, I'll tell you.
It is.
We did have 2 years respite, where we finally fooled some. I'm convinced. Had a wonderful time with turning it over to a nice young lady whose name was Lena, and she and her husband ran it for a couple of years, but then they moved. They moved away from Seattle area, which is where we lived, and then we had to take it back over again, and we've been running it ever since. So to say that we've been at it for better than 3 decades with very little rest.
Yeah, that's an accomplishment.
Yeah, if it doesn't drive you crazy, it'll drive you somewhere. But our coven is known as Starworm, and it is an eclectic tradition, but it mostly borrows from the Gardnerian style of Wicca. And let's see, what else can I tell you? I'm 71 years old. I'm still able to move on my own, but I often will use a cane. And I've been writing since the mid-'80s on Wiccan things. Started out writing for a newsletter called the Georgian Newsletter, which was around at that time. And I just kept writing. I couldn't stop.
Got addicted?
Once you get bit, that's it. In one of the books that I wrote, I told people that if they want to write, if they have the urge to write, don't get near a computer, don't get near pen and paper, because once you scratch it, that's it. You're sunk. And it's true. It's almost like a terminal disease, because you can never stop doing it. And you look around for things to write about.
There's lots of things in paganism to write about.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, you betcha. So I started in writing for the newsletter, the Georgian Newsletter. Later on, got on what was called bulletin boards, which is kind of like the internet of today, only not nearly as sophisticated. And was happily surprised to find so many other people who were pagan around the country and around the world, who were equally happy to be able to converse with other pagans. So it got to be one of those growing things. And as the internet grew, so did the writing. And pretty soon I was producing stuff for several different, both print magazines as well as e-magazines. And never stopped.
Awesome. Well, let's start introducing some of your books here. Okay. Right here I've got Crafting Pagan Rituals. Let's see if we can get a closer view here. There we are. This book is available on Amazon.
As we were talking about a little bit earlier, this book is actually the connection to clear back in the 80s when I was writing. I started in writing about ritual making, which what I call ritual construction. And I asked a very simple question: how do you make a ritual? And I did a couple of months worth of paper and print research. This is back when you still had card catalogs and stuff like that. And I didn't find much written about it because, frankly, there wasn't much written about it. And what I did find was always slanted towards, well, I've got the handle on this. I'm an anthropologist, or I'm a psychologist, or I'm a sociologist, or all of the ologists had their own particular.
Rituals.
They didn't even agree on what a ritual was or what it wasn't. And I got very discouraged by looking through that. Oddly enough, the one person who actually wrote some very good information about it, although it was heavily slanted towards medieval Catholicism, it was still very astute. And that was a fellow called by Ignatius Loyola, or Loyola, excuse me. And he knew what he was doing. He knew what he was doing, and he did it purposefully. And if that name rings a bell, it's because he knew what he was doing, and many people decided that they wanted him as their leader in the faith, because he knew what he was doing. He wonderful quote of his says so much in one sentence. He said, "If you don't feel like praying, get down on your knees anyway." Actually, that incorporates so much wisdom, it takes hours to explain. The short answer on it, really, is if you assume the trappings or the demeanor of what you are trying to accomplish inside of you by changing what's outside of you. Hello, cat.
Excuse us, you two.
Meow.
All right, yeah.
Ah, yes. If you change what's outside of you, namely what you are doing as a physical human being, and or the trappings around you, then it will start changing what's inside of you.
It's very true. Yeah.
It's very true. I mean, a lot of our magic is based simply on that idea. Well, that was the information I went with, and then I figured, this guy's a Catholic. I'm going to go with the Catholics and go ask them, how do you make a ritual? You know, I even talked with the Jesuits. And although I think the Jesuit training teaches the principles that Loyola developed about ritual, most of them didn't have a clue.
Really?
Some did. That guy down in the monastery that I was talking about earlier to you, he understood what I was trying to teach their students. I spent a weekend down there teaching about ritual construction. Anyway, as I researched through a whole bunch of different leaders of various faiths, I found out a lot of them were just going to tell me that you do these rituals, their rituals, and you will, gain enlightenment, fall into grace with whoever, Ralph, George, whatever. And That's all you need to know.
Mm-hmm.
But how do you make a new ritual? You don't do that. All the rituals you will ever need in life, I think we just turned off.
We're good.
Okay. All the rituals you ever need in life are in this book or these books, or, I will teach them to you for some kind of recompense. But they didn't know how a ritual was built. And I said to myself, all right, look, there's lots of rituals. There's spiritual rituals. There's social rituals. There's personal rituals. There's all kinds of different rituals that we go through. What makes a ritual a ritual? When I attacked it with that question, then I started in seeing what rituals did. And I concluded, okay, rituals are there to change things. And most of our behavior is connected with rituals. We don't call them rituals sometimes, but they really are. And they have a purpose. Every ritual has a distinct purpose. And that is to change the moment inside our thinking. Now, work with me here.
Yeah.
Okay. Hi, my name is Blacksun.
Hi.
Glad to meet you. That's a ritual.
Oh.
It has every element in it that High Mass in the Vatican has.
Wow.
It's no more complicated and no less complicated. It's the same structure. The only thing that's different is the outside trappings. Okay? If you don't feel like praying, get down on your knees anyway. I don't know how many times I or my wife have told our coveners or our outer growth students or something like that, don't miss doing full moon. Even if you are doing it by yourself, take the time to do it. Because that ritual changes your life in a particular way. Now, it's not really important that you understand how it changes your life, although that's very interesting, to me at least. It is a truism that the ritual changes the person who is involved in the ritual. That's true whether you're doing it by yourself, solitary, or whether you're doing it in a group, or whether you're doing it in throngs of thousands. It's still true. If you were involved in it, it changes you. Every ritual does that. That's the purpose of ritual. That's why we do them. Well, if we do them, why don't we do something else to make those changes? You can, but it's not nearly as efficient. Ritual is a shortcut. Because you can do a ritual about full moon in about a half a second. In here.
Yeah.
Okay? In here. You can't make the changes in your life that doing that ritual every full moon for a year or more will do for you. You can't do it. It takes all day long, every day, to make that kind of change. You've got other things to do.
Oh, yeah.
So, ritual definitely has a purpose, and it has a strong purpose. What's the purpose of the ritual we just did?
This is a greeting, and it's also an introduction.
It's a way of trusting one another. I don't know whether it's true or not, but the story I heard from the time I was a little kid about why you shook hands like that was to shake any daggers out of your sleeve
Really?
and to make sure that your person on the other end of the shaking was also shaking daggers out of theirs. It was a way of developing a social contract, if you want to get technical about it. But it does. And it has, you can seal a contract with a handshake.
Mm-hmm.
You can open negotiations with the people who are contracting with a shake. It covers a lot of things.
Mm-hmm.
Whether you got daggers up your sleeve or not.
Yeah.
I investigated what ritual was and investigated what it did.
Mm-hmm.
I investigated how it did it. And then my wife and I, in a discussion one afternoon, I remember we were on a picnic, sat down and we were discussing this because by then it had pretty much consumed me.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, if I wasn't, going or coming from work or working, I was involved in trying to think about this. It became an obsession with me, and she, lovely lady that she is, and great poet, decided to try and help me formulate the internal structure, and developed, through this conversation, developed 7 steps that every ritual had to go through.
Mm-hmm.
And those 7 steps were in every ritual. And it was a great bit of synthesis. The problem is, we forgot something.
What did you forget?
The first and most important step. We assumed it. We figured this is so obvious we don't need to state it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the one that was so obvious that we didn't state, we needed to state. When we first started trying to talk with our coven about this,
Mm-hmm.
what I had discovered and so forth, we taught them the 7 steps of ritual construction.
Mm-hmm.
Every time they would come back and say the same question, one way or the other. They would question one thing, and this was the step that we forgot.
Mm-hmm.
Why are you doing this? And that became our little internal joke about how you can miss the most obvious things sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't know what you want your ritual to do, guess what? It won't do it.
Mm-hmm.
Or if it does, it's 1 in a million chance.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you probably did it because you made a mistake along the way. The fact is, that is the most important step. If you don't know what the purpose is,
Mm-hmm.
if you don't know where to aim things, you'll never hit the mark. Talking about the importance of that then became the first thing that I wrote about when I started making up a little pamphlet, which later I gave the right to publish that to the Circle Sanctuary as something I could contribute towards their land fund.
Mm-hmm.
And it was called the 7 Steps of Ritual, I think it was called Beginning Steps of Ritual Construction. Mm-hmm. And it was a little 8-page booklet. And it was easy enough to copy off a bunch of copies of it and staple up the pages and hand it to somebody. But it wasn't enough. Mm-hmm. Like I say, when you get to be a writer, you're bitten for life. You're infected for life. There's no cure. So, one time, during full moon, my wife and I had been thinking about getting a computer. This is back in the early 80s.
Oh.
And we'd done a bunch of research on it. And I said, you know, I'm going to tell the goddess right now, we get the computer, I'm going to write ritual construction into a full-fledged book. Week after that, we got a computer.
Nice.
It was given to us by her father.
Ah.
And we said, well, thank you. You know, just out of the blue, this happened. And I didn't even know he knew we were looking at getting one.
Really?
Anyway, thanks, Mom. So the thing was, I sat down and I started in writing. And writing, and writing, and writing, and writing, and writing. Well, I wasn't, you know, very good at writing. And I'm just now, 30-some years later, beginning to say I can write about that and feel confident that I can. But the more you write, the more you learn how to write. It's like a lot of other things. And so I started in producing. So I produced something that was about 130, 150 pages, typewritten pages, 8.5 by 11. So I put that together. And then when I got it all together and I had it nice and fancy and everything else, and I'd taken it down to Kinko's to have it all done, front and back pages and all this sort of thing, spent a fortune on putting that together, something like $30, but that was including the 3-ring binder. I went all through that and I said, this is garbage. I can't stand to put this out with my name on it. So I sat down and I started in writing again, and writing and writing and writing and writing. And the one that I turned out was called 3 Times Round the Circle. And a couple of my friends, loyal that they are to me, were kind enough to take a copy off my hands and that I produced for them as a present and say, that's nice, pat, pat, and keep it on their shelves. And I, as a matter of fact, just went back to see one of them a couple of weeks ago, and there it was sitting on the shelf, and I couldn't help but laugh, okay? Because that's a relic, and there's very few copies of it. So anyway, several years later, 1992, I gotten done, and I decided I'm not going to call this 3 Times Around the Circle. I'm not going to call it the beginning steps of ritual construction. I got to call it something else. Well, a movie had come out about King Arthur and all this thing, and in it was this wonderful portrayal of Merlin, and something that he did, which was called the spell of making. And if you've ever seen the movie Excalibur, you will understand what the spell of making actually originally was when they called it that. But I used the spell of making as the title for my book. And I presented it to several publishers who said, and, enough, pretty soon you get a thick skin. And then one publisher said, ta-da! And I said, you're my boy. So I went with them. Unfortunately, this guy was, he was at one time working for another publishing company and decided to branch off and try to form his own. And it went okay for a couple of years until, in order to keep the company afloat, he had to sell his car, and then he sold a bunch of other personal items and so forth. So here he is, practically destitute, and he's still trying to run the company. And he had my book, The Spell of Making. It was out. And all of the stock that he had went into essentially foreclosure, and he ended up not having anything to do with the distribution of the book any further. And in fact, all of the copies of that book ended up in some dank, dark warehouse for a while, I think. Like I was saying before to you, this is the same place they put the Ark of the Covenant in Indiana Jones. And so the beauty of this was that pretty soon the book got a demand that wasn't being filled. And of course, I had by then learned how to present the material that was in that book in a lot more compact form. I got it down to a 1-hour presentation at one point.
Nice.
Well, yeah, but I had to skip over a lot of things. And
well, they have to buy the book.
Yeah, except the book wasn't available any longer. And if you went to eBay, you could get a book anywhere from $90 on up to about 125 or something like that, which was ridiculous. I couldn't afford that.
Yeah.
I was lucky I was lucky that I had 2 copies, and so the book got somewhat notorious because of that. And everybody said, you got to have this as your reference. If you're going to be a priest or a priestess, and you're going to be in the position of where you need to make a ritual for this, that, or the other thing, then you really ought to read this book, because it'll tell you how to build one. And everything's got the same internal structure. You just learn to decorate it your own way. Then Amazon bought up all of the material from whoever had it after this guy had gone bankrupt. And so now there's some copies left. There's also an ebook copy of it available through Barnes & Noble.
Oh, wow.
The paper copy of it is available through Amazon. But because it got to be nobody can find it, I decided, okay, tell you what, I'll put it on a mini CD disc, okay, and distribute it that way. So I did for a little while. Nobody wanted to do that. Nobody likes that kind of book, okay. And which Amazon and Barnes & Noble figured out right away. And so they produced the little e-reader tablets.
The Kindle.
Kindle and Nook being the main commercial ones. I sat down and I said, let me go through my, on the computer copy and see what I can do. And the only thing I could figure out was this really isn't giving all the information in the way that I want it to, and I don't like my writing in it, and because now I've become more critical of my own writing, blah, blah, blah. And so let's see what I can do to tweak it here or tweak it there. Well, I spent a year trying to tweak it into something that I liked, and I just gave up, threw my hands up, decided that I was going to write something else. And I did. And this is when Obama was still in the primaries for his first term. And so I wrote a book called The Once and Future Witch, which was my way of kind of fantasizing what would happen if a witch got into the White House.
I think we've got the copy right here.
In fact, you do.
Yeah. Once and Future Witch. Also available on Amazon.
Also available on Amazon. Also available in Kindle, just as all of these on Amazon are, except for the Spell of Making. Sorry, 3 times around the circle, spell making, whatever it's called. That's what you got in the book now called Crafting Pagan Rituals, which I wrote after I got this done. This was turned out in about 3 months worth of writing.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a horrible term. I call it projectile writing. Because it was one of these things where I had just retired, had a lot of time on my hands, and morning, noon, and night I was on the computer writing this, and it turned out so clear in my mind that I was surprised when it ended. Okay, it just happened, and it was one of these things like, oh, I didn't expect that to be, and it was wonderful. I had a wonderful time writing it. I'd never written really fiction before. So I'd written all this stuff for The Spell of Making. I'd written for producing little miniature CD discs of books. I had written for newsletters, always on a nonfiction basis. But writing fiction, I found out, was a lot of fun.
Oh, yeah.
And I could have all kinds of fantasies. And my style of writing fiction is I basically sit down and start in writing it, and I find out what happens later. Don't laugh, it'll happen to you. And it'll happen even on nonfiction stuff. All of a sudden you're writing something, you say, where did this come from, Because it's like a brand new thought just coming through you. Say it in whatever way you want, but you're channeling the muses. That's what they talk about.
Yeah.
So I got done writing this. And then another book, another storyline came to mind, fiction. And it was a lot darker and a lot spookier than this was. And that was called The Haunted Scrolls. And The Haunted Scrolls, the storyline is based in Seattle. That's where I lived all my life. And it's about some witches in Seattle and a female detective cop and her sidekick and a very nasty, spoiled, rotten girl who also knows a lot about ceremonial magic and all this sort of thing, who's out to conquer the world. Not really. She isn't out to conquer the world. She's just out to live the rest of her life young and beautiful forever and ever. Amen. Basically immortal and, staying young.
Wow.
But there's a catch to that one. And the catch is you need 100 people to bleed to death for you in order to be part of this spell. Where did the spell come from? The spell came from something called the Haunted Scrolls. They're called that because an ancient Middle Eastern magician by the name of Adat Hanut wrote these scrolls, supposedly over a period of over 300 years. Well, so says the legend about the scrolls. Nobody knows if it's true, but it's the same ink, it's the same kind of parchment, it's the same handwriting. But it's been dated differently on each scroll. So there might be something to it. Well, she thinks so. And all she's got to do is get a situation where she can kill off 100 people, bleed them out, cook up this nice little picnic for herself, and get it done. Well, obviously, it's bad witch against the good witches, and along with the Seattle homicide cap. And I turned that one out. That one really taught me a lot. It taught me a lot about why I was having fun writing fiction. It also taught me about expect the unexpected when you're writing your own fiction, because all of a sudden in the first half of the book, this character comes along that I didn't even know, and took over the role that I kind of planned for this other character, and where in the heck did that come from? Who knew? And so the fact was that surprised me a lot. There were several surprises in there, not the least of which is why I was writing the fiction. Yes, it's a way of fantasizing on paper.
Mm-hmm.
And it is, definitely cathartic and all this sort of thing. But in this book is an awful lot of teaching other people about Wicca, about magic, and so forth. Because not only did I set up this nasty set of circumstances, but I also set up people who needed to be told this, that, or the other little thing that I had learned along the way of Wicca, being a practitioner of magic, being a priest, and all the little things that I had figured out on my own or had learned from others. And in it, I say, this is how this works, or this is why that happens, or this is why we do it this way. And so it is, in a way, it's a teaching book just as much as the spell of making, aka crafting pagan rituals. But it's in, obviously, a fantastic form.
Yeah.
But I tried to keep the magic as real as possible.
Mm-hmm.
There's very little twitching the nose and making the housework go away. Okay? There's very little Buffy the Vampire Killer. That's, matter of fact, I've definitely tried to stay away from that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I got these characters all wrapped up in it. When I got done writing that, I decided I was going to write a streamlined version of the spell of making. And I sat down and I did. That's where Crafting Pagan Rituals came from. So, that's the story behind these 3 books.
Ah, so they're all kind of related then.
They're all related. 3 other books are related to them also.
Well, let's go take a look at those.
Okay.